Hello and welcome to another one of our 10-minute quick guides to one of the heroes of the Flesh and Blood trading card game. My name is Steelfur, and I have chocolate sauce on my hand. My name is Steelfur, and I am here to give you a quick 10-minute introduction to Levia, the Shadowborn Abomination. Levia forms what was one of our first sets with talented classes in, Shadow and Light Monarch. Forms one of our first talented heroes, this time a talented brute hero. She is a Shadow Brute hero. A lot of new players get hung up on what cards Shadow and talented heroes can play. And the easiest way to remember it is that if it has both of the keywords on the card, then the keywords on the card have to match the card. If it only has one of them, then that's fine. So Shadow Brutes can play Shadow Brute cards and Shadow cards. But Brutes cannot play Shadow Brute cards because they only have one of the keyword. Similarly, if there was another Brute, which was like a Fire Brute, they would not be able to play Shadow Brute cards. The Shadow Brutes wouldn't be able to play Fire Brute cards, but they could both play the Brute cards they share between them. So let's not get hung up on that. Levia is a very interesting hero. The entirety of the Shadow mechanic and the Shadow cards, which share a theme across both her and the other Shadow hero, is all about interacting with the Banished Zone. And they have this ability called Blood Debt, which says at the beginning of your end phase, so the end of your turn, you lose 1 life for each Blood Debt card in your Banished Zone. Chain focuses on playing cards from his Banished Zone. Levia usually does not, and the Tome of Torment here is mostly the exception. You'll notice that's a Shadow action. Most of the Brute actions don't actually play themselves from the Banished Zone, unlike the generic Shadow cards. So if you're looking for cards that play themselves from the Banished Zone, you're looking at Chain or you're looking at Shadow cards rather than Shadow Brute cards. What Levia does have, though, as these Blood Debt cards will accumulate through the game and you won't have many ways to play them, is this brute check of if something with 6 or more has done something, which is common on brute cards. In this case, if a card with 6 or more has been put into your Banished Zone this turn, cards you own lose Blood Debt during the end phase. So what Levia is a hero that focuses on graveyard management. Essentially, you have a lot of cards that require you to banish 3 random cards from your graveyard, and if you banish a card with 6 or more power, you'll get a bonus. So go again. This one gives +3 and dominate. This one gets +1 for each Blood Debt card banished, and you can banish up to 6 of them, so it can get 12 strength. So really, as you can see, a lot of it is just making sure you are banishing a card with 6 or more power every turn, so that her ability means you don't lose life at the end of a turn, while also using those 6 power cards to fuel your combos and your aggression in that way. If you do end up with a lot of 6 power cards, the legendary card will allow you to create one of the 2 allies that are currently in the game. An ally just sits on the board until it takes damage equal to its health, in this case 6, and it can just do an attack for free, with a special bonus if it's attacking a light hero. It's worth noting the attack doesn't have Go Again, and most of Levia's cards don't have Go Again in terms of the attacks. Dread Screamer is the rarity there, which means that actually Levia is very much a one big hit hero with a few twists. And a lot of people do play these what are they called? Dread Screamers in the deck to get Go Again. And you'll see here, as we pivot over to a UK Nationals deck that finished 9th, it is running 9 of these Dread Screamers to get Go Again. You also, of course, have the option as well of rolling on your Scabskin Leathers. Remember that an action point is not the same as Go Again, but Go Again gives you an action point after the action resolve. So if you have 2 action points, you don't need Go Again because you can spend the action points differently. So you can use those to get more action points. And Levia really does enjoy setting up a combo. And let's have a bit of a look at some of the combo pieces now in Levia to give you a good idea of the cards you're going to need in order to make these things work. So we want Graveling Growls, we want Dread Screamers, perfect. So the important thing to understand, right, is that all the time you're trying to banish a card with 6 or more power, and you're also trying to get off as much damage as possible. Levia is not a fancy sort of on-hit character. She's very much, I'm going to hit you, and this is what you're going to hit me with. So the first thing we'll start off with, and this is a very good card to own if you're playing Rhinar or Levia, is this Bloodrush Bellow. Now, Bloodrush Bellow is a theme that's very common to Brute, and if you watch the Rhinar video, you'll understand this a bit more, is that you have to discard a random card from your hand, it gives you a bonus, and if the card has 6 or more power, you draw 2 cards and it gains Go Again. The important thing to understand, of course, is that it doesn't have Go Again if you don't discard a card with 6 or more power, which means that you really do need to hit that card with 6 or more power. A lot of people are reading this and thinking that, oh, well, that's quite random, that can't be very good. The important thing to understand is that 1, 3, 6, 9 of your blues have 3 power, and then in the rest of the deck, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, keep going, 24, 27, 30 of the cards in your deck have more than 6 power. Really, you play this card by putting it in Arsenal, or by pitching basically the cards that don't meet the criteria, or blocking with them to ensure that you always meet the criteria. Once you've met the criteria, your weapons, of which you have 2 of them, can then attack for 5 each with the 2 bonus from this. And of course, because you've discarded a card, they have Go Again. So often what you'll do is pitch a blue to pay this, discard a card that costs 6 or more in your hand, and then attack twice with the weapons as long as you draw another blue. And then if you draw a third attack, like anything really, like a Pulping or like a Dread Screamer or like any of the Hungering Slaughter Beasts, there are lots of basic 2 for 7s and things like that in this deck. If you draw any of those, you can also play it then for another 9 attack, and that's a really powerful combo. Your second big combo is a bit more expensive in terms of monetarily wise, unfortunately, because Art of War is a generic. It is a bit more expensive. This card is incredibly good in Levia, mostly because you want to banish cards, and this line here says you can banish an attack action card from your hand if you do draw 2 cards. So you're essentially turning off Levia, saving yourself... I call her Levia. There is an argument for her being called Levia. Oh, I don't know what that is. I think my plant has just fallen over. I'll deal with that in a second. So you'll banish the card, you'll draw 2 cards, and then you can choose, if you have Go Again, to get +1/+1 on your attacks, or you can choose to give your next attack Go Again, which, as you can imagine, again, if you're playing a lot of these big attacks that you can do, you can actually get 2 7 attacks, strength attacks off in one turn, while also drawing cards and also satisfying Levia's ability. If you have 2 Graveling Growls, that could be 2 1 for 7 attacks. 1 blue pitch equals 2 1 for 7 attacks. Another good card which some Levia players play is Shadow Puppetry. It gives your next attack +1 and Go Again, which of course can be really good if set up with some of your big attacks. It also gives you ability to look at the top card of your deck and banish it, which can of course be useful as well for negating the Levia hero ability, which you need to turn off every turn. So that's a good option to have as a backup, though it is better to use one of these things that banishes lots of cards from your graveyard rather than relying on it hitting, because if this is your only way to hit, your opponent may just stop the damage and block everything to make you take blood debt. There's also cards like Pulping as well. Pulping and things like this, the discard effect, are really useful in the early game for Levia, because essentially they help you fill up your graveyard even if your opponent isn't attacking you. And that can be really strong. So you might be thinking discarding a card, that sounds like a drawback. But actually, Levia needs to fill up her graveyard with these 6 power cards. And sometimes just drawing a card and then discarding a card at random is good enough to stack your graveyard and give you more cards that you can banish to play your big combos. Like, this is one of your biggest combos that you have. It's Dread Screamer. You pitch 1 blue. You banish 2 random cards. You obviously hit a 6 or more. And then you can play Graveling Growl for 7, or you can play out a Boneyard Marauder as well, which is also a 1 for 6, only off a blue pitch. So you could have blocked with a card and still have gotten off 6 into 7 or 6 into 6 damage, and that can be really strong. And that's really all there is to Levia. She's kind of like... she's got layers to her. On the surface, she's kind of like a beat stick hero where she... comes in really aggressively and punches people into the ground. But due to the graveyard management aspect, she has layers. She does, unfortunately, fallen out of favor. Well, she was never really in favor. She's not the most popular hero, specifically because she has the chance to kill herself with her own ability, which a lot of players aren't really that fond of. And that's kind of a bit of a drawback for her, is that if you don't successfully turn off her ability late game, you will actually end up taking quite a lot of damage due to Blood Debt, which is why you'll see a lot of the decks that play Levia don't load themselves up too much with Blood Debt. A certain amount of Blood Debt is included, where it's powerful abilities like Dread Screamer, and like like the Graveling Growls and the Hungering Slaughter Beast, etc. Because you do need a good ratio of cards that let you banish cards from your graveyard, but it also means running lots of powerful brute cards like like Bloodrush Bellow, Beast Within, running Command and Conquers, running Pulpings, Pummels, lots of options basically to give you power without having to banish. So the early game, you can win. Now, there's two other cards I want to talk about before we wrap up this video, because they're quite important to the long-term strategy of playing Brute and of playing Levia. The first one is, well, I know what the first one is. Yeah, the first one is Ghostly Visit, not Hope Merchant's Hood. The important thing to understand about Ghostly Visit is that this is one of the cards that can be played from your banished zone. So even if you haven't seen a Boneyard Marauder or a Graveling Growl, you might have banished this once or twice or 3 times and be able to play it again whenever you have Go Again in order to guarantee that you can add in an extra follow-up attack. Similarly, with Howl from Beyond, because you can play it from the banished zone and then it goes to the graveyard, you can re-banish it so that anytime you have spare resources, and you've obviously met the conditions you need to meet for Levia, you can follow up with a Howl from Beyond. The other thing to note, of course, is Reckless Swing. Levia may seem like a super aggressive hero, and she is, but all brutes have this capability of wearing your opponent down, and if you get them to the point where they have only 2 life left, or in this case, because there are 3 Reckless Swings in the deck, potentially even 6 life left, you can actually kill them from that point. So Levia can be super aggressive, super aggressive, super aggressive. And then when she starts to run out of resources, she can then just switch to a more defensive mode where she's banishing cards and doing an attack every turn, and then waiting for that 6 power window where she comes in and kills it. So that's Levia. She's very much hungry hero. You have to control your graveyard, which is her way of feeding herself in order to get maximum benefit out of the hero. You have to play well. You have to come in with these multiple attacks and make sure you're getting the 6 cost attacks in your graveyard, both by blocking a lot and setting up the right combos. And if that sounds rewarding to you, you may find Levia quite rewarding. Kind of ignore the people that say she's not very good. We've seen her play very, very well in quite a few metas, and we've seen her do better than most people expected of her. She can have some inconsistencies. She does occasionally kill herself with her own abilities. But if you put the time into Levia, I firmly believe she can actually be a very rewarding hero. So if the aesthetic matches with you, I wouldn't be put off Levia based on the lack of her performing deck lists on this list or anything like that. I take a look at this list and other lists that have placed well. I think there's a lot that people could do with Levia. So, if she sounds like your kind of hero, feel free to give her a try.